Well, welcome to the JD Power Travel Podcast. I'm Michael Taylor, and as always, I'm joined by Andrea Stokes, who's the practice lead for travel, for hospitality at JD Power. Hello, Andrea.
Hello.
And Jenny Corwin, who's the director of consumer insights at JD Power. Hello, Jenny.
Hello.
We thought we'd have 4 topics to talk about here as we start to go towards the close of 2021. And one of the big topics that we discussed prior to this podcast being recorded was the return of international flights landing in the United States. And I had mentioned that when this topic was brought up by, I believe, Jenny, is that I was out at JFK Airport this past week, or last week, I should say. And there were many, many cameras set up in the parking lot across from Terminal 4, which is one of the bigger international terminals at JFK. And I thought, well, just, some celebrity is coming into town. But nope, it's just normal people who are finally being allowed to come back to the United States. So anyway, Andrea, what does this mean for the hospitality segment?
Yes, well, we did get the news just a week or so ago that STR has upgraded its forecast for 2022, forecast for both hotel demand, but also ADR. So it's a sign that the industry in general is more optimistic. Economic forecasts, I think, are more optimistic. And, everyone is talking about the increase in demand that we saw over the summer kind of coming back after the first of the year. So it's all really good news.
Is a lot of that the international component?
I think it's some of it. Some of it is the fact that, the U.S. did reopen, borders to international visitors. And then some of it is, I think, due to the improving outlook for business travel. So transient business travel, as well as group travel for, meetings and conferences and conventions. So I think that's also kind of fitting into the more optimistic picture that STR is providing now.
And Jenny, what's your perspective on the impact of international flights resuming?
I think it's all positive, right? For the most part, it's positive, anyways. At least for as Andrea said, when you look at the economic forecast and the outlooks, right? I think there's still obviously going to be concerns around staffing levels. Anytime we have more people and we still have a labor shortage, right? Just service levels when you have crowds that are bigger. It does put a little bit more strain on the system, but it's good strain, right? We need the demand, so that way hopefully the labor supply will follow at least. But yeah, all good news.
And some of the things that are going to be little glitches along the way from the industries that I cover. Airlines adapted to the pandemic by taking some aircraft like the Boeing 777, which is almost exclusively a transatlantic or trans-Pacific aircraft, and using it on domestic flights, which was very unusual to go from, say, Orlando to Memphis on a 777. We were able to do that for a little while. Just seemed like a very odd thing. And now, of course, they're going to repurpose those aircraft in their fleet to go back to what they were originally intended to do, which is fly long haul, mostly over water. And it's going to be a little glitch here and there because they have to obviously replace those flights and those crews and that aircraft that would normally be flying from Orlando to Memphis, with the normal 737 or A320 Airbus or something like that. And so we may see this international travel have a slight ripple effect on some traffic patterns within the United States because of the way they need to reposition aircraft and repurpose aircraft. And as Jenny and as you pointed out, the staff shortage is still hitting the airline industry and the airport industry as well. Mostly in the space of, we have to rehire these pilots and these flight crews that are qualified for these particular aircraft. And they have to go, for the most part, through retraining before they're allowed to operate an aircraft. So it's not like riding, flying a 777 is not like riding a bike. You can't just hop back on it after, a year or so of not flying one. So they do need to certify for safety concerns through the FAA, normal FAA rules that they have. And again, that may cause some glitches as we go into seeing a heavier transatlantic and transpacific traffic. And then as a final note, these are some of the more profitable routes that airlines operate. And obviously there's been pent-up demand for these flights. So it's going to be a little bit of a shot in the arm, I think, for the airline industry. And in some cases for the airport industry, because certain terminals at certain airports, like say Newark B, have been almost completely empty now for almost a year because of the lack of transatlantic flights. Anyway, so Andrea, I think there was some other stuff that you wanted to talk about. You had mentioned the Smith Travel Research forecast and how that's looking. Is there any other detail that you want to add to that Smith Travel Research forecast?
Well, the NYU Investment Conference just happened, which is a well-known conference in hospitality, and there were several CEOs there from the large hotel chains, the large global chains, also talking about the optimism and what. So it was good to hear what the CEOs were saying about 2022. They did talk about business travel coming back and the optimism there, but they are expecting basically most of the business still to come from leisure travel. And they did make predictions around what types of leisure travel would be popular, such as staycations, traveling with pets. So talking about what hotels can offer consumers next year, given all of the changes, right, that consumers have gone through just in terms of mindset and the types of trips that they want to take and sort of what the pandemic has, how it has influenced how consumers think about travel. I know, Jenny, you had found some trends, some predictions for 2022 around the consumer and travel. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, especially when you put together what we've heard from Mike around international travel coming back and then the STR forecast, and then you think about the situation that people find themselves in, right? A lot of people have postponed a lot of trips, and there is that pent-up demand still. I mean, I think people are really getting back into traveling, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. But it does seem like people are going to be able to be more flexible. We've kind of really settled into this remote work life in many cases, which means work from anywhere is really a thing when it comes to planning your travel, right? You can have a longer vacation, maybe a 2-week trip where you only take a long weekend in the middle, but you're able to work the whole time. And, for those of us here in cold weather states, the idea of working somewhere really nice and warm for a couple weeks and having some vacation days in the middle is quite nice. So I think that's something we're going to see a lot of going into 2022 is flexible travel. I do think in order to do that, we're going to see a lot of planning ahead, or at least we would recommend planning ahead given the variability of the situation, right? There's still going to be a lot of unknowns. There are different laws and rules, and the situations are still changing as you go around the country and internationally, right? Some countries still have quarantines in place and mandatory quarantines and whatnot. So I think there's a lot of unknowns when you think about planning for travel in 2022, but it does look very optimistic. A lot of people are saying, we saw a few surveys where people are planning 3 or more trips for the next year. They're planning longer trips because of the flexibility of their situation. So I think it'll be a really exciting time to see this return to travel. But as I said before, pack your patience, right? For those of us traveling and those of us working in the travel industry, right? We're all kind of going to have to deal with this sense of newness again, right? Remember that first time you flew on a plane, and imagine most of the people you're going to be flying with haven't flown in 2 years or checked into a hotel in 2 years. So
yeah, I would say that I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast that we've done some research at a very large, very busy, leisure destination airport. And one of the questions that their management had was, it seems like there's a bunch of inexperienced flyers coming into the airport who have no idea what they're doing. And we were able to use one of our products, Passenger View, which I think we've talked about in this podcast before. It's a platform that J.D. Power offers to airports where they can use their Wi-Fi system to deliver very short surveys on particular topics and get really quick feedback. And that's what this particular airport did. And they found that 46% of the people who were traveling on that holiday period had not flown in the previous year, which is a shockingly high number for any large major airport to have almost half the people in it having never flown in the previous 12 months. So I think, Jenny, that you're correct. You're going to find a lot of people who just aren't that experienced at it. And I think most of us on this podcast, I would like to think that we're relatively experienced travelers, and I'd like to think we all have some patience. But I know that one of my pet peeves are the people who stand in the middle of the aisle and goof with their carry-on luggage in the overhead bin for 5 minutes, holding up, 150 people behind them, when they're sitting in row 7. That tends to get me a little, my blood pressure up a little bit. I've never said anything, but I've been very tempted. So I think we're going to find a lot of that, as we go back into this travel season, and people just aren't used to traveling. And then also we're going to get quite a few people who just haven't traveled much at all in their lifetime. So anyway, the last topic that I think we should explore among us is what are the tips you've got for holiday travel? And we've mentioned a couple of them already. But Andrea, in the hospitality sector, based on what's happening and how people are planning their trips, what would you say that the advice you'd have for people traveling during this holiday travel period? What would you tell them to do?
Well, I would definitely plan early and plan often. So I would expect, especially over the holidays, that many hotels will be booked. You have to do a lot of research ahead of time to make sure, you can find a hotel and a specific room that meets your needs. I think, just activities like visiting museums or even, going to restaurants, be prepared for crowds, be prepared for having to make a reservation for, activities that maybe you wouldn't normally. Because I do think, especially, the bigger destinations, maybe more tourist destinations like Orlando or New York City over the holidays, right, will be very, very busy. So that's my advice, is just to, not only make sure you can find a place to stay, but get to where you're going, and that you're able to actually, do the activities that you're hoping to do while you're at your destination.
And Jenny, what advice would you have for folks?
I think it's very similar to Andrea, right? Just be patient, plan ahead, do your research, right? Make sure you're looking for the things that are very important to you. I always like to start with a list of must-haves and a list of nice-to-haves when planning a trip of any type. I think it helps because sometimes we get caught up in all of the different options. So it's nice to think of what needs to happen to make the trip a success, what would make this trip a little bit better. But also just have realistic expectations. This is, as we mentioned, a lot of people are going to be coming back into this process for the first time in a long time. So, be patient with each other. Make sure your expectations are not that everything is going to go perfectly all the time. But with some research, any new trip can be successful at this point, I think, as long as you're prepared.
And be prepared for sticker shock.
For certain aspects, yes. And certainly sticker shock as far...
Right. I think the
Go ahead.
dollar will not go as far as you think it will. I think that goes for now over the holidays, but also just into 2022. Inflation, it really is hitting every part of the travel industry, just like it's hitting other industries. So again, just be prepared for your dollar not to go as far.
And the things that I've been saying to the media, because this has actually been a topic that I've been asked about several times in the last week or two, is pay attention to the order in which you actually make reservations, because there are certain constraints. And the biggest constraint being, if you're going to need a rental car or a van, in case you're traveling with a lot of family, that ought to be your first priority. And normally people have the order of, I pick a destination, then I look at airline flights, then I look at hotels, and then I look at rental cars. And you really ought to reverse that order in order to have a successful trip. You ought to be looking at the rental car first in a destination. And if there's one available at a price you think is reasonable, and I will also warn you, as Andrea and Jenny have just said, is be prepared for sticker shock, because it's going to be there. There was a definite shortage of rental cars, and it will continue all the way through probably the calendar year of 2022, not just this holiday season. So find out if there's a rental car that you can reserve it as soon as possible, then start looking for an airline flight, then start looking for probably a hotel, maybe the hotel first. Andrea, I don't know if you think that ought to be reversed and go hotel airline, but do you have any view on that? Should it be the hotel before the airline now?
I definitely think it depends on where you're going. Again, those popular destinations are going to be very busy. So definitely, I think it just depends on your destination. But again, start researching now. I think for Thanksgiving, it might even be too late.
Yeah, I think it would be too
thinking
late.
ahead to the winter holidays, it's definitely something you should be doing right now.
Yeah, if you haven't got a rental car reserved for your Thanksgiving trip, I believe you're going to be in a little bit of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So, and with that, we've come to the end of another JD Power Travel podcast. I'd like to thank Andrea Stokes and Jenny Corwin for their insightful comments. And again, I'm Michael Taylor. I'm the practice lead for travel at JD Power. And thanks very much. And we'll see you on the next JD Power Travel podcast. Thanks for listening.